There was a secret I carried for 11 days that could have cost me everything: my family, my community, my entire way of life, and for a long time, I told myself I would take it to my grave. I was 19 years old, unmarried, and living inside a world where reputation meant everything, where one wrong step could unravel a lifetime of trust built between you and the people you loved most. And I hid an injured English boy in our barn. Nobody knew he was there, not my mother, not my father, not a single soul in our community. And if anyone had found out before I was ready, I would have been shunned forever. My name is Hannah, and I grew up in a small Amish settlement in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the roads are quiet and the mornings smell like wood smoke and fresh earth. I was raised in a home where faith came before everything, where you kept your hands busy, your words careful, and your heart close to God. My father was a man of few words and deep principles. My mother was the kind of woman who showed love through feeding people and working beside them without complaint. I had two younger brothers and an older sister who was already married by the time I was 17. I knew my turn would come. I knew what was expected of me, and honestly, I never minded. I loved my life. I loved the rhythm of it. I loved the early mornings and the evening prayers and the way our community looked out for one another. I never imagined I would be the person who disrupted any of that. My days followed a pattern I could have described in my sleep. I woke before the sun, helped my mother with breakfast, fed the animals, worked the garden, preserved whatever was in season, sewed, cleaned, and by evening I was tired in the good kind of way that comes from honest work. We had neighbors who stopped by regularly. Our bishop was a gentle but firm man who held the community together with quiet authority. Every Sunday service reminded me of why I belonged there, why the rules existed, and why breaking them came with consequences that weren't meant to be cruel. They were meant to protect what everyone had built together. I understood all of that. I believed in it. Which is exactly why what happened that September still shakes me when I think about it. It was a Thursday, 2 days after a heavy storm had come through and washed out part of the fence line near our east pasture. My father had gone into town with my brothers to get supplies for the repair, and my mother was inside preparing for a quilting gathering later that afternoon. I went out alone to check on the horses and walk the fence line to see how bad the damage really was. The air was still damp. The ground was soft. And that is when I heard a sound that stopped me mid-step. It wasn't an animal. It was too irregular, too labored. I followed it around the back edge of our property, past the old oak that had stood there longer than our family had, and I found him. He was lying in the drainage ditch just beyond our fence, half covered in mud, one arm bent in a way it was not supposed to bend. He couldn't have been older than 17. He was English, I could tell that immediately. Jeans, a dark jacket, sneakers completely destroyed from whatever he'd been through. His face was pale and he was shaking, and when he saw me, he tried to scramble back, but he couldn't move without making this sound that I still hear sometimes when the house gets too quiet. A sound of someone in real, serious pain. I did not think about the consequences in that moment. I know people probably expect me to say that, but it is true. All I thought was that this boy was hurt, and he was alone, and he was scared. I crouched down and I told him I wasn't going to hurt him. I told him slowly. I kept my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. He looked at me like he was trying to decide if I was real. And then he whispered that he'd fallen from a ridge trail the night of the storm, that he'd been out there alone through the whole night, that he didn't know where his phone was and he couldn't walk. And something in me just made the decision before my mind could argue against it. I couldn't bring him into the house. My mother would see. Neighbors could arrive any moment. The quilting gathering was only hours away, and women from our community would be walking through that yard. I couldn't call for help the way an English person would because we had no phone in the home, and getting one would mean explanations, and explanations would mean questions, and questions would lead straight to a 19-year-old unmarried Amish girl who had been alone near the property with an English boy, and I knew how that would look no matter how innocent it was. So I helped him to the barn. Slowly. Painfully slowly. I made him a place in the far corner behind the hay, where the light came in soft through the old boards, and I told him to stay quiet. and then I walked back inside like nothing had happened. The next 11 days were the longest of my life. Every morning, I found reasons to go to the barn early. I brought food wrapped in cloth, water in a jar, the herbal salve my mother made for bruising. I had taken some strips of linen from the mending basket and done my best to support his arm the way I'd once seen my father do for one of the farm hands years ago. I had no real medical knowledge and it terrified me, but his color was coming back slowly. He was eating, he was speaking more and quietly enough that only the horses could hear him besides me. I cannot describe what it felt like to sit at the supper table every evening and listen to my father talk about the day and answer my mother's questions and smile at my brothers and feel that secret sitting in my chest like a stone. I hated it. I had never been dishonest with my family. Even small deceptions had always made me feel sick. But every time I got close to saying something, I thought about what would happen to him if I did. If the wrong people found out before he could leave, before he was safe, I couldn't live with that either. By the fourth day, we were talking, really talking. His name was Daniel. He had run away from a situation at home that he was only willing to describe in pieces at first, but by the sixth day I knew more. His stepfather was dangerous. He had left in the middle of the night and gotten lost in the storm trying to reach his aunt's house 2 counties over. He hadn't told anyone where he was going because he was afraid of being brought back. And when I heard that, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just hiding a stranger anymore. I was protecting someone who had nowhere safe to go, the same way my own community would protect one of its own. On the eighth day, my mother noticed I had been going to the barn more than usual. She asked me at dinner if one of the horses was giving me trouble. I told her I thought the storm had unsettled them, which was not entirely untrue. She looked at me a moment longer than comfortable, and then she nodded and went back to her plate. That look kept me awake until almost midnight. On the 10th day, my younger brother followed me. I heard his footsteps on the gravel, and my heart nearly stopped completely. I turned around and told him I needed him to go back inside right now, and something in my voice must have carried enough weight because he stopped and stared at me, and then slowly walked back toward the house. But I knew that was the last warning I was going to get. That night I sat with Daniel and I told him the truth. I told him I couldn't keep this hidden any longer without the risk getting too large for either of us. I told him I had a plan. There was a phone at the harness shop in town, used for business, and I knew the man who ran it would let me make one call if I explained it was urgent. Daniel gave me his aunt's number from memory. The next morning, before anyone else was awake, I walked to that shop and I made that call. His aunt came 12 hours later, parked down the road, and I walked Daniel out of that barn in the gray of early evening with nobody watching. I told my mother the truth that same night. I sat across from her and I told her everything, and I watched her face move through about 7 different expressions in the span of 2 minutes. She did not speak for a long time. And then she said that I should have come to her sooner. She said she was frightened for me. She said she was also not surprised because I had always been the child who could not walk past something suffering without stopping. She told my father, there were conversations I was not part of. There were people in our community who heard pieces of it eventually, and some of them struggled to understand. I won't pretend it was easy or that everyone embraced my reasoning. It cost me something. It cost me a season of trust that had to be slowly rebuilt. But I was not shunned, and I believe part of the reason I wasn't shunned is because when the full truth came out, the truth was simple. A girl saw a child in pain and she helped him. Daniel's aunt sent me a letter 3 months later. He was safe. He was in school. He was okay. I read that letter so many times the paper went soft at the folds. I think about that decision a lot. I think about how many times in those 11 days I almost stopped, how many times I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, how many times fear almost won, and I think the thing I learned most deeply is that compassion does not ask whether the moment is convenient. It does not check whether helping is safe. It just shows up and asks what you can do, and then it asks you to be brave enough to do it even when the cost is real. If helping someone in need could cost you everything, would you still do it? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if this story moved you the way living it moved me, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness is always worth the risk.